Now for our final speaker, we have another member of the class of '92. And Eugene Volokh has many other attributes that we can celebrate in addition to his being a member of this wonderful class. He's now the Gary T. Schwartz Distinguished Professor of Law here at the law school, and he's a prolific and extremely influential constitutional scholar. In fact, he is the 4th most cited scholar in all appellate court opinions across this country over the last decade. Oh. Yeah. He has taught almost everything here at the law school, from First Amendment to torts to crim law to copyright. And he's published more law review articles, op-eds, and spirited posts for his award-winning blog, The Volokh Conspiracy, which I'm sure many of you know. He's published more than, frankly, most of us can count. After all, we don't go to law school, most of us, if we're not, because we love numbers. Unlike Eugene, who had a first career as a computer scientist before he came to law school. He also runs our Scott and Cyan Bannister First Amendment Clinic, through which students have drafted amicus briefs in over 50 state and federal appeals court cases, and for which Eugene is frequently jetting off to exotic locales like, I don't know, Miami and Mississippi to give oral arguments. We're very lucky to have him with us here at the law school and to have him with us here today to talk to you about virtual reality. So welcome, Eugene.
I have a tournament I have to be busily engaged in. Ooh, there it is. Unfortunately, this is not actually plugged in, otherwise I've been having much more fun. It's actually part of the problem with modern VR technology. We're at virtual reality 1.0. This is a HTC Vive headset. It's not goggles. When I had this on, it was all dark. Couldn't see any of you. That's why I had to take it off. It would be embarrassing and dangerous otherwise. But this is one of the areas that I'm studying now. And one thing that I like about VR is that at least the modern headsets, probably more than what they'll eventually be replaced with, are actually a pretty good metaphorical as well as real representation of what's going on there. Because when you put it on, two things happen. First, it's like you vanish to the rest of the room, right? Because you can see me, but you can't see my face. And for a human, if you can't see someone's face, it's as if they're not in the room. I've left the room. But at the same time, had it been plugged in, I would have had quite a rich and immersive experience. An audio experience, a visual experience. I don't have at home, but I have been at a place where they have these Virtuixes, which are these kind of round plastic things you can stand on. You move around, they're kind of slippery, and you have special shoes that sort of slip, cause you to slip back. There's a belt that keeps you from falling over, and you can play games where you're moving and it senses you moving, even though you're actually staying in one place. So I find virtual reality very interesting, and I want to tell you briefly why. There are two versions of this talk, actually two completely different ones. One is based on a law review article that I've co-written. It's coming out in Penn in a few months. It's on law and virtual reality and augmented reality. I think it's interesting stuff. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about. In fact, what I'm going to be talking about is virtually nothing to do with the law. I hope you'll forgive me because I think my dean and other colleagues will say, yes, Volokh, he does write some articles about law. He's done that. He's done that. He's entitled to a detour and frolic every so often. So mine is into VR and society. If you think back about internet, there's a lot of interesting internet law out there. I've been involved in a lot of interesting internet law matters. But if you want to think about what's been significant about the internet, it's how it's changed society. It's how it's changed business. It's how it's changed entertainment. It's how it's changed the way many people spend their time, much more than how it's changed law. So I want to talk briefly about that. I'm trying to work on a book of essays about VR. I keep getting distracted by other fun things, but this is what I'm thinking about. And the title of this is How Virtual Reality Will Change Real Estate Prices. Now, this isn't because that's what I'm most interested in, although, of course, living in LA or anywhere in California, it's got to be of some interest to all of us. It's because this is one of those things that people's first reaction is, well, VR will change a lot of things, but how will it change real estate prices? So I want to suggest that VR is such a powerful technology, it will even have an effect on that, and I think actually quite a sharp effect.
So I want to start with work, VR and work. So most of us are pretty similar businesses. And those of us who work for law firms and those of us who are partners in law firms are probably pretty keenly aware of just how much it costs to run a business just in terms of the sheer real estate. And there are two components to that. One is the commercial real estate, the space in the big office building. But that's probably the much smaller component. It's the cost that your firm pays for residential real estate for all of the people who live in LA and San Francisco work for you. Now, you may not pay it out of pocket. You may expect them to buy their own homes, but you surely are paying for it in the elevated prices that you have to pay for people who work and therefore live in one of the high-priced real estate markets. So imagine you have a situation where you have VR commuting. Now, people have been talking about telecommuting, and in fact, actually, in our line of work, and probably at our seniority, many of us probably do telecommute considerably. I work from home on many occasions. I'm sure many of you do too. But it still hasn't taken off quite as much, in part because of monitoring. That supervisors think, I have somebody who's ostensibly working at home, but how do I know they're working at home? Imagine everybody has one of these on. But it's seamless. So they feel like they're sitting in their office or whatever their perfect office could be. Their perfect office could look like they're sitting on the beach. But if they want to talk to a subordinate or a colleague, they just push a button. It's actually easier to look in on somebody in VR, properly designed, than it is to actually go down 2 floors in the building. Another concern that people have is serendipity. They say, I like the idea of somebody running into somebody else in the hallway and talking about stuff. Although if you think about it, at a typical firm, and for that matter, a typical law school, a lot of people I never run into because they're just on a different floor from me. And certainly it's true at firms. It's certainly true at firms that are multi-office. You will not run into somebody in a different office. You could actually better emulate serendipity. Spontaneity has its time and its place. So serendipity is well emulated. You could better emulate it by having a model where everybody's expected to have lunch with each other in VR, which basically means they're sitting at home having lunch, but sitting and talking, and then maybe with even randomly chosen people from their firm, randomly chosen people from a practice group, all sorts of things you can do. There are a lot of different ways of creating it, but the important thing is it solves the real estate problem for the law firm. It becomes much cheaper to run a firm when you can hire people who live in South Dakota. Or if that sounds too grim, and I'm sure there are people who love South Dakota, who live in the Colorado Rockies, who live on beachfront property. We think of beachfront property as very expensive, but there's a lot of beachfront that's a lot cheaper than Santa Monica beachfront because it is in a place where there isn't a lot of work right around. If you spread that out, the expense gets less. So that's how it'll save real estate costs for people. But how will it affect real estate prices? Well, why are real estate prices so high in Los Angeles? Because everybody wants to live here. Why do people want to live here? Because there's the weather, but there's a lot of weather of this quality not far from here that isn't in Los Angeles. It's because that's where people work and that's where they need to be. The more VR commuting takes off, the more we have things leveling out. The more we have population density, the patterns of human settlement leveling out. The more likely you are to have people who live in South Dakota or live in Colorado, or of course live in India or China or a lot of other places, and would VR commute to work. And that's how it will affect real estate prices. Now, note one thing that we need to think about, at least with modern VR, is between the two kinds of work, and two kinds of, we'll get to later on, non-work relationships as well, what I call pure audiovisual and trans-audiovisual. Most of our jobs are pure audiovisual. It's all about seeing and being seen, hearing and being heard. That's not true of a chef. That's not true of a masseur, right? But it's true of a very great many jobs, and not just high-end jobs, in social status or high-end jobs in income. It's true of tax accountants. It's true, well, my tax accountant is pretty high-end in income. It's true of secretaries. It's true of people who work for your law firm. Pretty much everybody is pure audiovisual, except the janitors and such, but those may not. Those are there precisely to take care of the non-audiovisual problems created by the pure audiovisual. So this isn't going to change the way restaurants work, although it may make the business model harder for some restaurants as population density flattens out. But for a lot of the pure audiovisual jobs, VR commuting will become a big thing. Now, a lot of people say, but it isn't the same. And I totally agree that it's not the same. It's not the same experience as in-person presence. It isn't right now with VR 1.0. It probably won't be for decades or maybe even forever. But it doesn't have to be the same. And the models that I give are theater, candles, and horses. Now, why do I say theater, candles, and horses? Theater, candles, and horses are by no means perfectly substituted for with movies, light bulbs, and cars. And we know that because there are billions of dollars spent each year on theater, candles, and horses. Obviously from people who view those as to certain things as superior to the technological alternatives. At the same time, we know what the dominant solutions to the various problems are in society, the problems being entertainment, lighting, transportation, and they're not theater, candles, and horses. That those have been largely at a 99% level supplanted by something that isn't the same, isn't as good in certain ways, isn't as warm, isn't as human in some respects, human-friendly, but it is technologically far better in other respects. So it doesn't have to be the same, doesn't have to be as good on everything, it has to be good enough if it's better in other ways. So the consequence, as I was suggesting, is a change to the city. That the city is a solution to the problem of getting a lot of people together to do work together. And if that's no longer as needed, then cities become less needed. Now, the next thing that I want to tell you, and this is where I think you need to forget the lesson that is taught by just looking at this and seeing from the outside how alienating this, how antisocial it is virtual is social. The first killer app for virtual is work, but another one that is just as important is social. And what I mean by social is we're all at we're all in class of 92 and other such classes, and we have kids who are either left home or will leave home soon. And we would like to have dinner with them every so often, right? Now maybe they don't want to have dinner with us, and we can't solve that problem with virtual kids. Maybe. But what if they do? But there are ones in Boston, ones in San Francisco, ones in New Delhi, although he'd have to have breakfast with us. And what do we do? What do we do? Well, we could say, oh, come visit us, but they may do that once or twice a year. Or we could, every week or two, have virtual reality dinner. It's not the same. We can't cook for them. We can't share meals. We can't hug them. But for most of our interactions, even with our children, adult children, are pure audiovisual. Imagine, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, the young generation will do it. I'll never do this. Well, you'll never do it until your kids go off to college and you want to have dinner with them. And then it may become, just like the movie's not a perfect substitute for theater, but still one that's the predominant example in that sector, it becomes really something that will be very important to people's social lives. Now, a lot of people say, of course, but that isn't real. I want to have real dinner with my kids. And my message there is real is as real does. And one way of thinking about it is email could have been called virtual mail. I was a computer programmer around the time email made it big. And we talked about virtual things all the time. There's virtual memory is the classic example. Could have been called virtual mail. But I don't think if it had been called virtual mail, anybody would say today, I get a lot of V-mails, but I want some real mail. Maybe for love notes, although even those you never get on paper. No, you don't, because real is as real does, right? If it communicates information for you remotely, that is mail, and it's actually much superior in many ways to real mail. I think the same thing may be true of virtual dinner. The product, not the tool. You want to know whether it provides you what you want, provides you the product, the result, and it doesn't matter the means, the underlying technological means, so long as they allow you to have the social or the work life that you want. So virtual, I think, will affect family life. Virtual will affect sports. Partly already we're seeing that will affect sports spectatorship, but imagine all the games that you could be playing in virtual that aren't the same. It's not going to be the same virtual volleyball, but some of it may be games you couldn't play non-virtual. How about Quidditch? Real Quidditch, really hard to get. Virtual Quidditch, I've actually played a model version. It was pretty impressive. There's more virtual in religion. Imagine people who want to be religious. I'm not religious at all myself, but imagine people who want to be religious, but go to their neighborhood churches. You know, the pastor is uninspiring. The congregation is kind of boring and materialistic and doesn't live the beliefs. But somewhere out there, there is a religion, or there's not even a religion, but there's a particular religious community, maybe spread all over the world, and a particular pastor that really speaks to you. And he does speak to you. And even though he has a congregation of 10,000 people all over the world, when you put on the headset and he gives you the sermon, it's like you and your closest friends in the congregation sitting around the table with him, and he is speaking to you, and he's making eye contact with each of you. Could be a very powerful religious experience, could be a very powerful cult. Virtual community. How will virtual change community? On one hand, maybe if we're all like this, we never get to meet our neighbors. On the other hand, maybe we'll move to places for the trans audiovisual experience. We'll move to the ocean because we want to be near the ocean. We'll move to the mountains because we could get the work anywhere else, but the trans audiovisual, actually going for a walk in a particular area, we can only go for the kind of area that we want, we can only find there. Maybe we'll find that we have more community links because the people around us are people who want to be there for the things that we value there, and not just ones who happen to be planted there for work. Travel, history, and fantasy, a convergence of that. What if you want to travel and you've retired? Now you have the money and the time to travel, but maybe not the health to travel anymore. You want to go see the Great Wall of China, but you know, it's a long distance, it's an expense, it's a hassle, it's time zone changes. You can put on your headset and you could see the Great Wall of China. But you don't want to go to see it now, you want to see it hundreds of years from now when the Mongol hordes were washing up against it. And whether you realize that you don't really want to see that, you want to see Middle Earth, right? Right? All of that becomes a spectrum. Traveling, history, fantasy will become something that becomes kind of hard to tell apart from each other compared to what it is now. And of course, let me just close with this. Fortunately, we're almost out of time, so I won't need to get into all of the details, but use your imagination. And don't just use your imagination for the porn. Think about what would happen with VR. Imagine there's a VR with the haptics is the term for touch. But imagine that this is so, and your spouse, your lover, is halfway around the world for work, for military service, for travel, for whatever else. You could have these relationships, a sexual relationship with them. But then you imagine, say, you know, what I'd really want to see is my spouse as he or she was 25 years ago. If I were to change their depiction, after all, in my headset, what goes in my headset is just my business, right? If I just change that, I could be seeing them as they were then without them even being any the wiser. Although, of course, you might suspect that they're doing the same thing to you. So the question is, where is the line then between porn and sex? And what does that do in turn to love, to relationships, to family? And with that, I close.